Lo-Fi Man is kind of a blending of different kinds of genres. It definitely sci-fi dystopian because there's robots and oppression, but there's also rebellion. And a love of cinema is alive and well in our movie. It's got a monster fight. It's got body horror. It's got satire. It's a whole big mishmash of a movie. And it's a 15-minute movie, but it's got a lot packed in.
I would say sort of, man, where do I even start from? Because it's a mix of different things. Like the song itself is talking about following your intuition. And as you follow along in the video, you have these two characters that are sort of doing different things that they normally wouldn't do. You know, they find this mysterious place and they're very excited to sort of embark on this journey. And so I feel like in a sense, the video sort of represents my life, maybe not like in the exact form like in the storyline, but more in the abstract sense, or sort of the message behind it of doing things by just following your intuition, following your heart, and wherever that leads you. So I would say that that's sort of where my life sort of plays into that. And similar to the director as well, we both kind of sat down and were like, what are some of the things that you've done that, you know, following your intuition while facing your fears? What's some things that I've done following my intuition, facing our fears? And that's sort of how that was blended into the visual as well.
So the film is about the Atlanta native, or Vinings native to be specific, Nellie Mae Rowe, who was a self-taught artist who lived the bulk of the 20th century. She was born the 4th of July, 1900, and died 1982. It's her life, and it's her life kind of trying to become an artist and to live her life the way she wants to live it, under pretty difficult circumstances. Nellie Rowe was a Black woman, living where she did, and during that time period, came with automatic sort of difficulties. She also had very little education and resources. So during these situations, she still figured out a way to express herself and become quite an amazing artist. And to tell her story, we're sort of mixing techniques. We call it a hybrid film, in that we're mixing sort of fiction film making techniques, such as working with scripted scenes and working with actors. Uzwa is the actor who reimagines Nellie Mae Rowe, and we're working with character animation. So we have an animated version of Nellie Mae Rowe, voiced and motion captured by Uzwa. We also have Nellie's gallerist. Her name was Judith Alexander, who quote unquote discovered Nellie in the late 70s and brought her art to the established art world. And Judith also appeared as an animated character in the film, and is played by the actress Amy Warren. And we also went so far as to reimagine or restructure Nellie's home that was known as a playhouse, which was a work of art in its own right. And that house was quite well known, especially in North Atlanta, in the Vinings area, and Buckhead and so forth, because it was sitting right on Paces Ferry Road. And it was this sort of ever-changing piece of art that, you know, took up her whole yard and the house itself.
The first seeds of this came with a friend of mine when I was 24. He died by suicide. He was bipolar. And that sort of happened, and that percolated. And at the time I was very young, and I don't think I fully processed it. And then a couple of years later, I had a family member attempt suicide, and they were actually later diagnosed as bipolar. And it was after that because it was a close family member of mine, I got to be at the hospital. I got to watch the way the family reacted. I got to really see, like, from the ground floor how we treat suicidal people in this country, and just in the aftermath of suicide. So that's when it really, I felt a yearning to write something. And I was looking for something to make a first feature about. I was 27 27, I think, at the time, and looking to write my first feature. And I had a lot to say, and I thought of just, I sort of I went to a coffee shop and I saw these two brothers in my mind, and the idea just kind of exploded out of me, because I'm the middle brother. I have an older brother and a younger brother, so siblinghood is also something that I understand really well, the complicated dynamics of family relationships. And I just saw the film and I opened up a Word document. I wrote a 1-page treatment, and I really just outlined to a large extent what the movie would be about, and then started writing, I think, the next day, and I had the first draft in 7 days. So and then, yeah, I mean, there's a long and storied, way that we all got to bring this movie together, but it was incredible to work with Daniel and work with Philip Ettinger and J.K. Simmons and Natsuko Ohama and all the cast who brought so much to the film, because at the end of the day, it really is like the films that I like to make are all about the characters.
When I was younger, I grew up with radio bingo, so that's how the concept initially first was introduced to me. We used to have local games every weekend where, and I'm about to give away my age here, because when I was younger, we had these really thick cardboard cards, because we would all go to a rec hall to play bingo. And we had these chips that we'd put on the numbers, and every time the game was over, we had this magnetic thing that would just collect all those chips. And that was the most fun thing about it, because I love to hear the clicking sound of the chips hitting the magnet. But as I grew up, I always listened to a local radio station, and they started doing radio bingo. So we started playing bingo right in our own homes. And nobody really knows when they started to incorporate the Mohawk language into the bingo games. That seems like the question. When did the Mohawk language get incorporated into the game? Nobody knows the answer to that, which is, it's so weird, it's odd. But yeah, that's what we do. We play bingo every Tuesday night, and we use it to revitalize the language. All the numbers are in the Mohawk language, and the prize isn't really about the money. It's learning and taking back a language that was stolen from us. The film pretty much follows community members who lost the language at the hands of the government-run schools, which are residential schools in Canada. They're called boarding schools in the States, and Indian day schools, which were ran essentially or operated right on the reservation. So they were targeting us targeting Native people from all angles. And that's what we had to do. They took the language from us. So we're taking it back.
I would say it's a haunting psychological thriller that centers around these 3 female friends that they've just had this death of another friend that was sort of the glue of the group, the one that sort of held them all. And so they're sort of in the aftermath of what is their friendship without this 4th person. And they decide to take this annual camping trip that they've gone on every year, all of them as friends, now without the one who has died. And most of the film takes place on this trip. And it's sort of this kind of needling, haunting film about the unraveling of this friendship as they're all out there, and kind of how they're all dealing differently with this grief and trying to come together as a group after that death.
We don't start from scratch, because me and Brian, this is like our 8th or 9th film we've made together.
Yes.
And before we even met each other, we'd probably made 10 to 15 movies before, through college projects and this and that. And this was a culmination of many years of bringing crew, friends, techniques, and things that we had been learning together.
Yeah.
Building for this.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. A culmination project, where we've been building towards something this ambitious. Funding is always elusive. Sometimes we crowdsource, most times we fund it ourselves. This was a situation where we were originally going to get a budget, and then it fell through 1 week before we started filming. So we said, let's just fund it ourselves, but we tend to be in the low budget realm anyway, so it didn't hurt us too bad, but it was a lot of pulling favors and being very resourceful with like props, and like Blake is a genius when it comes to finding great finds at thrift stores and then turning them into something like that makes the production value look so much like grander than it is. And this one, because it's independent, because it's a lot of DIY type of filmmaking, it took us like 2 years to do this film, from the idea all the way to finishing color correction and like post-production sound mixing. It took 2 years to complete. So it was a very, very long journey to get to where we are right now.
I think that what inspired me actually was the South. I noticed that South by Southwest has a short film category, and includes music videos and all of that. And I have started, the first time I saw that, I was like, oh, interesting. Like, people will watch music videos, really? Like, even though it's like 3 to 4 minutes or 5 minutes long, they'll watch it like at big screens. And I thought that was really special, that there was an audience for that. So then I started looking up different types of film festivals, and just seeing, okay, what's out there? Who has created a space to celebrate similar type of media? And then I came across Atlanta Film Festival as one of the ones that popped up, and I was like, oh my gosh! First of all, it's Atlanta. That is amazing. And second of all, to show a music video like this in an Oscar qualifying initiative, or I guess society, would be insane. So we just kind of took the leap of faith. I'm like, okay, what's there to lose? We're just gonna apply. So we literally went through the standard, typical application process that you would have for something like this, and then we were pleasantly surprised.
So Marquise and I have made a number of films in the past about artists and musicians. We call them creative underdogs, people who use their creativity to change or comment or escape the world that they live in. And Nelly really fit that mold, and that speaks towards the title of the film, This World Is Not My Own, right? We were actually approached by a foundation in Atlanta, the Judith Alexander Foundation, which is the estate of Nellie Mae Rose gallerist Judith. They were interested in doing something in terms of a film about Nellie Mae Rose, her life. I'm not sure that they had envisioned a kind of scope and length that we wanted to do, but basically we came down to Atlanta and we pitched them and said, this is what we want to do. It should be a feature length documentary, and we should really be ambitious and make something that is worthy of Nellie's art, because at that point we were deeply in love with the work that she made and with her story, and that was the impetus of it. And from there on we spent many years developing the story and eventually starting to produce it, and raising funds along the way as well. And it took a number of years.
I've studied the careers of filmmakers who have their debut feature, and I was so excited to finally step into the realm and do that. And I think it was honestly, it even surpassed my expectations of what it could be. And granted, that's because we brought on the right team and the right people, and who were all committed to telling the story the way that I wanted to. But it's the hardest thing you'll ever do in your entire life, and it's also the most fun you'll ever have on a film set. And I have a feeling that even films beyond this may not be able to capture that first experience. Really, for me, what was amazing about it was how malleable a feature film is that you're shooting for 4.5 weeks. So at the end of week 1, I could kind of work with Dan and Phil, who play the brothers, and start to understand, okay, well, how do we like working together, and what is this film starting to become? Because for me, as much as they admire the script, like, I think it's totally true that you have to throw it away and honor what you're seeing in front of you. And that Dan playing Jake is different than what it exactly was in my mind, or Phil playing Pete. And so trying to just sort of keep aware of what the film is giving you. An example of an extreme curveball, and it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but there's a waterfall that they stop at in the trip, and I had scouted it because in the writing of this script, I decided to drive the entire way that they drive and pick up all these like real things that they might be stopping at to fold into the script. And there was an incredible waterfall in Idaho that I had driven by, and I wrote that into the script. And then when we got to location scouting 8 weeks before the shoot, there was a drought going on in Idaho. And that waterfall did not look as impressive. It was like just a little thin little weak stream. But in my mind, I was already going into this saying, okay, well, let's, how do we adapt? How do we make it? So my producers literally 15 minutes after that found another waterfall in Idaho. And this one it wasn't really a public place, because this was almost like a national park, whereas they found this really intimate one. And when we shot it, I was like, I'm so glad that happened, because this is so much more intimate, so much more powerful, because basically the boys can kind of like walk underneath it in a way that you could never do that with the other waterfalls. So that's an example. And one last thing I'll say about the feature too is there's a lot of like films that the short films I had made, I'm like being very rigorous about the production design and a rehearsal process. And okay, well, let's make the color of the walls these colors. And sometimes I feel like those films feel technically interesting, but they're not human. And so I wrote this road trip as a way to kind of force myself to go out into the world and have to shoot in real locations and to have to just like bring real life. I think was my goal anyways when making this, is how can we bring these real human moments into the film that I think a lot of times films are missing nowadays.
But no, with the actual shooting, it was weirdly enough, I mean, it was some of the hardest work I've ever done in my life, probably the hardest work. But the actual shooting was the easiest process I've ever had. The producers were great. They had everything set up, at least from the side that I saw. It went really, really smoothly. The days were pretty easy in terms of the timing of things, how many hours we were shooting. The amount of takes that we got was just really generous. We got a lot of time to kind of play with the material. They really organized it really, really well. And the script, we had very, very few changes dialogue wise throughout the process. So that allowed me to prep like crazy beforehand, come in ready to go, and just shoot like crazy for a month and a bit. And it was, yeah, so there's very few hiccups. It was just really, really nice and smooth, which doesn't normally happen. And so as an actor approaching material that was a little bit more complicated and deep and dark alongside kind of the lighter moments was just really a blessing, and we're really grateful for it.
I felt that I was kind of lacking in the production end of filmmaking process, and I really needed to strengthen that and learn how to execute my films a little better. And so that was one of the main reasons why I went back to school, because initially I was a self-made filmmaker, and I had a lot of holes in my thought process about film. So I went back to school thinking, okay, it's COVID. I might as well just do this and see what else I can learn and get out there and try and make more stories and see what comes of it. And that was one of the stories that I had on the back of my mind, knowing that I wanted to do it. But I knew having a school behind me was going to allow me to open some doors, because when I initially reached out to people, I was like, hey, I'm a student. And nobody denies students, right? So I'm like, hey, I'm a student. Can I, do you mind if I come in? I got this story, I want to film it. And like, my community is so wonderful. They were like, yes, let's do this. So initially that's how the ball got rolling in my end. And with the school, they helped me just execute everything I wanted in the story. And we just really put it together and made it really well. I mean, I was surprised how well it came together. We executed every note, and the teachers are industry professionals. So I was getting, like professional advice, which is gold. That's gold right there. And I was pretty excited about that.
So in the film and television industry, I wear two hats. One hat is as an independent producer in Toronto and Los Angeles. The other is as president of Toronto Film School. And so this time last year, every May, we do a film festival for our students where our students come and they showcase their films. And this time last year, I was in attendance watching the top films from our students from that year. And I was watching Shelby's film. I didn't know Shelby, but it just really resonated in a way that was surprising. It was so topical. It was so accessible. It was charming. It had a message. And I was just like, there is something incredibly special and incredibly important here. And I made sure I met with Shelby that evening, and we had the opportunity to talk. And from my perspective, wearing the Toronto Film School hat, I was just so incredibly proud of her work and that she had brought this story to Toronto Film School, and we were able to celebrate it with our community. But from a producer point of view, I was like, there is something here. There's something so important and just something so genuine and authentic, and there's a story that needs to be told. So it kind of hit me from two angles, and that really sort of began the relationship with myself and Shelby as a filmmaker, where it's just how do we kind of keep this momentum up? How do we create teams around this? How do we make sure that Shelby is supported and this story is told? And I feel I'm being pulled along for the journey right now. This is really Shelby's success, and this is Shelby's story. It's a real honor and a privilege for me to be here, experiencing what Shelby's experiencing.
Well, yeah, we were so lucky. This is both of our first movie, and Shannon's boss fully funded the entire movie. So we were in a really unique position that we had the script and the funding before anything else. So that we learned as we talked to people down the road, they were like, what? That's so unusual. And that normally doesn't happen. Normally you have to attach someone first. So we were in this really great, fortunate position from Bob Potter, who's funded the entire movie and has changed our entire lives. But yeah, Shannon got the script to him and he read it and he was like, let's make this movie. And then we started having all of these discussions and we were like, okay, who's going to direct this? Who's going to star in this? How are we going to do this? And then Bob was the one who was like, well, Jess, I think you should do it if you're interested. And I'd never directed anything. So this was very new. So then I talked to every director I knew, waiting for someone to be like, don't do that. You're insane. And everyone was like, you should totally do it. So then it was decided I was going to direct it. Shannon was going to produce it. And then our first kind of big thing was bringing on other producers who had made movies before, and especially around our budget range, because we knew we were going to be the first timers. So everyone around us had to be much more experienced than us. So we just started reaching out to producers, people we knew kind of like in the indie scene. A lot of friends of ours had made movies before, so they like recommended people. We just started meeting with people, found a couple of amazing producers. And then the cast, we were always kind of eyeing Sunita. She was someone we had wanted like very early on. And we were literally cold emailing casting directors, again, who had cast things that were in this budget range that we really liked. And we found Kate Geller, who had cast Shiva Baby, and she liked the script. So then she came on. And then once we got Sunita on, then everything else sort of kind of rolled into place. And another super, super fortunate thing is my cousin is a DP and he's shooting like big studio movies now. And so I emailed him and I was like, who do you know? And he was like, well, I'm going to do it. So that was really cool to like get him on. Also, it's cool to have a family member there because you can abuse them in ways you can't with normal people. So getting to work together was awesome. But yeah, it's kind of that thing that once a couple pieces fall in, then everything else kind of starts like naturally coming after that. But yeah, we were so lucky that we had the money. So everyone we talked to that we hired knew they were getting paid before they came on, which was really nice.
I would say part of why it's so challenging for people of color and for women. I guess I'll start with people of color. The infrastructure. We do not have an infrastructure that has been set up predominantly to help people of color thrive. And as a Black person, as a Black creative, I have to run through several hoops, wear multiple hats, and still in the midst of all of that, it's still a challenge to be given opportunities. Now, this music video, in all reality, will not have been possible if not for the entire production team being like, okay, we know that, okay, so tracing back a little bit, before we created this video, we were trying so hard to get a grant in Vancouver, or I guess in British Columbia. We were trying so hard to get a grant to help with the funding of this. And we tried so many avenues, so many creative ways, and it just was not panning out. And the entire production team, they were like, we believe in this project. We want to see this happen. What are you able to do to make this happen? We know that it's not working out in the perfect way that we would love it to, but what can you do with with what you have, type of thing. And it ended up being the type of set where it was a miracle set, is what I would call it. And it goes to show the types of boundaries that people of color have. Because had it been, I'm even wondering, like, of course, the video is beautiful and phenomenal and amazing, but I'm thinking to myself, if we had done the type of funding that we needed to push this, if we had more people behind the scenes, because the issue in the industry is that we don't just have limitation in female artists or female directors or female producers, but also in the industry itself, the people behind the scenes who are also vetting this work. We are also limited in those industries and in those spaces. And so, we don't have a lot of directors that are women. We don't have a lot of producers that are women. So with that in mind, there's that sense of empathy is lost a little bit, and that sense of connection is lost a little bit. And so it becomes a bias, and then you're at the mercy of whoever is looking at it behind the scenes. So, on the funding side, it's already a challenge. And then we just say, okay, we're going to work with whatever we can, however we can do it to make this happen, which is exactly what we did. And then, after creating the video, the next thing was now being able to market that in different spaces, and that in itself was also a challenge.
I always like to tell people that that you have to have the mindset, like I have the mindset that perspective matters, authenticity matters, and lived experience matters. And if I didn't have all of those in place, I wouldn't tell this story. But because I lived on the reserve my whole life, I'm half Mohawk. So I have that. I have the authenticity because I've been and experienced everything that goes on here. I'm a part of this living culture. And I always, try and preach and hold, certain productions accountable for the content they film, especially like actors, diverse actors, especially in front and behind the camera, for Indigenous content, of course. But yeah, I really strongly believe that we need to have those things in place, especially when telling our authentic stories and in filming those stories, having everybody in place, in front and behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think, again, as someone who loves the genre, I think a lot of what we see, I mean, typically, obviously, it's been dominated by men, and there's the whole idea of like the final girl, and there's usually like, they're normally female led, which has been really cool, but they're often written and directed by men, and often the story at the center is the threat at hand. There's no other kind of inner turmoil, or the horror is coming from like without. And I think when you have more women telling stories and more women writing stuff, like, to a woman, what's horrifying in the world is going to be really different to a man, or to a man's idea of what women are scared of, or what kind of we go through like on a day-to-day thing. And so I think we need men and women and trans people and everybody in between to tell their personal story, because we know what it's like to go through life and feel a certain way, and what's scary to us about that. So when you have someone telling that in a very personal way, I think you get stories that you wouldn't get told from someone who hasn't personally experienced that. So I think you just need, to me, my favorite stories are when you see someone telling it that it's so personal to them, because it's just always going to be better. And then the more specific it is, the more everyone's going to be able to relate to it. So I think like stories by women and about women are also going to be really relatable and interesting to men, in a way that stories about men written by men have always been relatable to everybody as well. So I think it's really cool and interesting, like to see that sort of diversity happening in genres that maybe haven't had it happen as much, even especially like horror, or, you know, genres like that, where it is still typically mostly men.
We had a really rare opportunity to have sort of our whole team. So it's 3 producers that are all female, and then Jess obviously is a writer director. And so to have sort of only voices in the room that would have an impact be women was really empowering. And I think we got a lot of like feedback about that from people on our crew, because I don't think that's very common to have like across the board everyone on set that you're like looking to is a woman, especially when you're telling this kind of story. And it's so interesting because women have often gotten leading roles in these horrors, but it's almost like, I really wonder, even to just be directed by a man in a scene that is sort of exploiting your vulnerability through their own eyes, I could imagine is not an excellent experience for everyone. So I know for sure for all of our actors, it was like a complete dream come true to be like talking to someone who would innately understand everything, especially because she'd written it, but like more so just because she would understand how they were relating to it in a way that a man just inherently never could. And it's not like a bias thing against men. It's just the reality of like us living out in the world as we have to. And I think horror, especially, that's like exposing fears, and like the 3 women alone in the woods sort of provokes this question of like, well, they're all in danger then because of this. And I think it's really telling that that's not the way the story goes. It's not saying like that was a dangerous thing for them to do. Like the danger isn't coming at them, it's from inside. And so that's kind of empowering too, that it's like they're dangerous. I don't know, you know what I mean?
You know, and I've been lucky enough to be in Atlanta over 22 years. I was part of one of the first films that received the tax credit several years ago with Will Packer, and then I worked with Tyler Perry on several projects after that. And the great thing about Atlanta and really Georgia is I think there's a very calm spirit of engaging entertainment where it doesn't feel so pretentious. It doesn't feel tremendous anxiety around it. I think whenever I work on projects in LA and New York, sometimes, you know, there's a tussle. Like everyone's trying to kind of move and adjust and jostle for this and jostle for that. But I think talent likes being in Georgia because of the fabric of the state. You can be in Savannah in very southern, deep southern. You can have the city feel of Atlanta. Then you can go out to Augusta, LaGrange, and get different feels, whether that may be period pieces or action movies. Like, of course, they've shot Fast and Furious here. And then the fact that there is so much production that takes place, you get a really solid community now. Now, it has taken time to develop the community, but the great thing is that today the community fully exists. And so regardless of where you sit within the production, I mean, from craft services up to top of the call sheet, everyone feels welcome and they feel like, hey, there's some commonality here. Like I can connect with other folks and feel
good. And then furthermore, outside of set, whether you're at a Hawks games, a Falcons game, whether you're, you know, in the Centennial Park area, you feel like there's a lot here to do and engage with the market itself. So I think it's really great that the Atlanta Film Festival exists, that it allows us to have this opportunity.
But it's pretty awesome because we can have jobs where we work in the film industry, and be and you know, take cues from how the people who have a couple $1 million to make their movie, like, if only we had that much money. But then you look at it and it's like, it only comes with more problems to watch them with millions of dollars. It's like, so really you take some notes and you learn, like, how can we utilize and be more efficient when we're making our own independent films. And it's great. It's helpful.
I come from New York and I've lived here now for 10 years. And one thing that attracted me to come down here was this sense of community, because I visited Atlanta before I moved down here several years before. That's when I met Blake. I met you in 2008 when I had a film play at a festival here. And I loved Blake's enthusiasm, and the people he was friends with were also filmmakers. And then there were these filmmakers, and then there's this spook show that happens at the Plaza Theater. There's all this, like, there's this community, and they're all kind of like heading towards the same thing, but marching to their own beat and doing their own thing. So I really loved that. You know, I didn't have that kind of community when I was living in New York. I had my tight-knit group of friends who we made films with, but I didn't really know any other filmmakers who were doing stuff in New York. So when I came down here, all of a sudden I met Blake, who was making films, and then there was Chuck and Tack and all these people who were making films on their own, all working together, but like working on each other's movies. And it was really great to like meet up with Blake again when I moved down here in 2012. And I sort of like glommed onto him and his friends group, and now we all make movies together.